Yellow. Give me a thumbs up if you can hear me loud and clear. We are going to get things started very shortly. I am the presenter, Bobby Dorless. It looks like we have a few familiar faces, and we got a real cool topic to cover today. I'm very excited. Thank you all for the thumbs up. And let me get my slide going. I'm looking at my hair. It looks like it's all crazy in the camera, so I don't know how I'm looking today. It's up. We got a really good topic to cover here. So let me get my screen sharing, and then we can jump right into our talk today. If you could, in the chat room on the side, let's get everybody a quick introduction of yourself. Tell me your name, what school you're at, and if you're in school. And then also tell me what's your most proficient programming language. So name, what school you're at if you're in school, and then your most proficient programming language. Let's go ahead and fill up that chat room. See where everybody's from. And Nora, are you here to help me out today as a career peer?
Yes, yeah. Hello.
I want to say welcome to Nora. If you all haven't had a chance to meet her, she's going to be assisting and supporting us or supporting us throughout this conversation this afternoon. And definitely feel free to send her a message if you have some specific questions or you need something followed up on. Or if there's something that you want me to make sure I talk about, reiterate, hit her up, and then she'll make sure I get that message. Right, Nora?
Yes.
Thumbs up. All right, for sure. Let me see. I got one FAU. We got a senior at FAU. We got a few people that's putting their. All right, here we go. We got programming language Python. A lot of Python. I love Python. Python's my most proficient programming language, and definitely encourage you all to continue practicing that skill. Let me see if I can get a little bit better lighting in this thing. I'm looking like I'm 3 days ago. Maybe a little bit better. All right, whatever. We'll make it work. Thank you all for letting me know that information on what school you're from, programming language. And the reason why I asked this is that one thing I want to let you know is that I've interviewed hundreds of candidates before, and nothing against any other programming language. So I'm not trying to put down any other programming language, but the programming language that has been most proficient for candidates to showcase their skill set has been Python. I have seen some success with Java. The other ones, definitely, if you are proficient at it and you can showcase your skills, do use it. But if you are thinking about a programming language to use specifically for interviewing, I highly recommend Python because you don't have to worry about those syntax things, curly braces, and all that stuff. Just indentation, and then you're good to go. And plus, there's a lot of libraries for you to be able to do so many things. Actually, I'll put in a trivia question before we even jump into our conversation. Tell me a pro and a con about Pythons. One thing that's really cool about Python for you, and then one thing that you feel is a con about Python, because I'm always interested to see what challenges people have with that programming language. But put in there some pros and cons. Somebody says syntax is really easy. Con is that it's slow. A con that says it has hidden magic. Sometimes I think computers have hidden magic. Pros, everything is an object. People saying it's slow, it's slow. Yeah, yeah. Python definitely is one of those interpreted language. So if you're not familiar with what that means, is that there has to be a middle person before the code gets to the processor. When it's compiled, that means it's being compiled in processor code. So then there is no middle person. And yeah, Python is definitely a little hefty. Somebody says a con says it has no types. Yeah, I know that's a Java person most likely. Type languages. But anyways, thank you all so much for dropping that in there. We're going to jump right into our talk, and it is titled Secrets to Cultivating Technical Interview Confidence. Now, this is going to be a talk that really foundationally, I'm hoping to build up your confidence in interviewing and really understanding the things that we look for from a candidate's perspective, from an interviewer like myself, but also the things that when you do them, you definitely can excel and or build up proficiency or showcase proficiency during the interview. Now, the next thing I want you to mention inside the chat room is how many technical interviews have you had? Not mock interviews, actual company interviews, and just drop a number in there so I can kind of know what experience everybody has. How many real technical interviews have you had? Looks like we have a few people that haven't had one yet. No worries. One person has 2, 3, few ones. Three plus bombed them. That's all right. It's no worries. It's a learning experience with these interviews. Maybe 3 to 5. But in general, it definitely sounds like we have an audience here that are looking for ways for you to build confidence in interviewing, and I'm hoping that I can provide that for you today. So we're going to jump right into the topic here. So if this is the first time that you had a chance to meet me, first of all, welcome. If this is not the first time, you already know how I am. I have a good time. I'm very extroverty in the terms of I love to talk. I really like to talk about my story, and really somebody that's always looking to pour into your cup. A little bit about me. I've been in the industry for about 20 years, especially for those that haven't met me yet. I've been in the industry for about 20 years. It started way back in 2002. I don't have a college degree. I'm one of those that did 2 years of technical school certifications, and hands in the ground learning is really where I was able to develop my skill sets. I'm somebody that has worked for some really cool companies. One of those that you may have read used to be a cool social media company. I don't know how cool it is anymore, but it's the one that used to be the little blue bird. So I worked at Twitter for almost a decade, becoming a senior level engineer there, working on a lot of their cloud computing infrastructure and teaching, mentoring, and coaching a lot of engineers on how to interview, but also how to excel in their job. So I'm hoping that I can really give you some context around the things that I've experienced as an engineer, and hopefully give you some confidence when you showcase your ability during the technical interview. Now, my most proficient programming languages, quote unquote, is Python is my number 2. Golang is my number 3, and my number 1 programming language, if you didn't know, is Bash. Now, Bash is that terminal that you see, and you most likely, if you're using a Mac, maybe more experience with ZSH, but all of them are more or less interfaces for you to be able to interact with the computer. And not only is it a terminal, but it's also a programming language, if you didn't know, because you can do so many things in Bash. And definitely, if you want to, get some more insights about that, hit me up. I'm always open to talk about my proficiencies, not just around programming languages, because I'm also a systems engineer. I don't know if y'all caught that. As an engineer, I was a systems engineer, but also software engineer. But today's not talking about me. We really want to talk about what is technical interviewing. And definitely, it seems like a few of you all may have not had the chance to interview. One person's had 6 interviews. I guarantee you're becoming really proficient. 3 interviews, 2 zeros. But in general, let me just talk to you about what a technical interview is before we just jump all the way into the topic here, and how do you build confidence. So technical interviews is a way that companies evaluate your proficiency and see if it aligns with the position. Now, if the position's mark is here, companies or most candidates feel like you have to be here or above. But companies are okay if you're not at the mark, but you still have to show proficiency, because companies will teach and train you to bring you to that level that you need. But how do we measure that? How do we get insights into your ability, which is why we conduct technical interviews. Now, usually broken down into 3 to 4 different rounds. Your first encounter with a company most likely will be a recruiter, and that's going to be somebody that's going to reach out more or less for an online assessment, quickly reviewing your resume and comparing to see if you potentially can match the position. The next round is usually a technical conversation, meaning a technical coding exercise and or a technical conversation. Let's just talk about tech, right? There could be also a round on behavioral, like, hey, tell me the last time that you tripped and fell and what did you learn about it? And more or less those type of behavioral questions. And then the 4th round, which I always enjoy, is the offer letter. So get to the 4th round. That's what we're all working towards, right? Negotiating and offering your position, but more specifically around the technical interviewing, that's where we're going to dive even more deeper. Now, when we talk about the technical interviewing landscape, why is technical interview so critical, and what companies are looking for? Now, I did give you some, quick, I guess, nuggets on how we and what we were looking for in engineers working at Twitter, but let me just elaborate a little bit more. Remember, technical interviews are meant to measure your proficiency, measure where you're at in your journey. And as you are in your journey, are you at the level that we can support you to either grow into that position, or you still have a void in terms of your skill sets that need to be closed before we can move forward? Technical interviews, especially coding interviews, are going to be really measuring those skill sets around those programming languages you're most proficient at. Not just being able to solve a lead code question, but writing code in a way that showcases your proficiency as an engineer. There's a concept called clean code, and I might mention it a little bit later, but we really want to see you develop code that represents who you are. And for me, I'm not a perfectionist, but I like to take pride in my work. So I actually really like to write code in a clean fashion, either variables, indentations, structure wise, and having includes at the top of the file, defining constants in the right way, making sure that arguments, especially with Python 3, have types defined, and/or what the return is. But in general, these are the things that we are really looking for when we're evaluating candidates. Now, not only is a proficiency in coding something that we're looking for, but we're also looking for who you are as an individual. A lot of people definitely have this feeling that when you're in a technical interview, all we're going to do is talk about tech. Technically, we really want to have an environment where we're collaborating with you and conversating with you on your journey so that we can understand how, in general, you could potentially mesh with other members of the team, other people in the organizations, and then see if the things that you're passionate about aligns with what the company's heading towards. It definitely things that we're looking for. Now, with all that, the thing that I think a lot of people, when they're going through the interview process, are really looking for is building up the confidence to succeed in this interview. And what are those confident factors, which is what we're going to really break down in our conversation. Not just, all right, this is what the interview process is, this is the way that you get ready for it, but how do you build confidence? How do you feel yourself during a conversation? Actually, while I'm even saying this, I wish I would have added a slide here with a table at a police department. And you understand why I'm saying it like that, because a lot of people feel like when you're interviewing is that you're being interrogated. And truly what you're having is conversation. But how do you feel confidence in that conversation? And I have 4 topics that we're going to cover today. In general, problem solving fundamentals, right? This is where you're really confident in showing the skills. For me, definitely lets me know that you're confident. Obviously, data structure and algorithms, something that you all are being exposed to at school. And if not, I definitely have some resources at the end for you to really continue to develop those skill sets. I have some interview strategies to help you build confidence, and then definitely the importance of mock interview. Because if you don't practice like you're playing, when it's time to actually really play in the game, you're going to stumble, right? And that's something that mock interviews has really been useful for me as I'm going through my years of developing this skill set around interviewing, and definitely has been impactful to a lot of cohorts that have attended CodePath here. Now, the first one that we're going to talk about is problem solving. Now, whenever I think about problem solving, right, this is the problem. This is the problem. This is the thing that I think a lot of cohorts have difficulty with, is running into a scenario where you don't know the answer, or running into a scenario where you don't have a solution and you have a problem, right? But the thing that we enjoy evaluating you when we're interviewing you is what skill sets are you using to showcase your ability to problem solve. And I'm going to step back just a little bit, because there's something that I want you all to be comfortable with. Be comfortable with the idea of unknowing, what you don't know. And hopefully the story I'm going to tell you really resonates with, because it kind of gets us back to problem solving, is whenever I'm interviewing a candidate and I ask them a question like, hey, can you tell me what an API is? I'm like, yeah, it's an application programmable interface. Perfect. All right. Tell me, how do you connect an API to a backend database? I don't know. That right there is perfect for the feeling that I have, because I usually get excited when I hear them say, I don't know, because that's what we want you to showcase your proficiency. What happens when you don't know? When you don't know something, how are you going to develop an answer that really reflects who you are as an engineer? Because we work in an environment where we're accustomed to unknown unknowns. Even to give you more context around this, I don't care what environment you work in, I don't care what company, thing company, or whatever, you're not going to know everything. So much so that people might even think you are the resource that has all the answers. But just be okay with saying, I don't know, but let me think about it. Let me develop a solution. Let me come up with a way to solve this problem. Let me brainstorm and/or use certain problem-solving skills to really help myself. I'm going to go back to this slide here, because when I'm saying learn the art of effective problem solving, it does require you to really practice answering questions that you don't know. That's why I want to go back to that slide, because I'm going to show you the slide and some of you may not know, but you're using first principles thinking to solve a problem. Foundational to solve problems, problem solving first principle is you take a big problem and you break it down to something very small, right? If they're asking you this prompt about this big old problem that you have to solve, you're like, oh my gosh, I don't even know where to start. That's okay. Let's break it down to the first thing in that prompt that we really need to focus on. An example, I was just in an office hour and the prompt was, hey, given an integer of strings, do something with them, right? And I was like, oh, the first problem that we're going to be solving is taking an integer or an array of strings. So what should I be doing? Taking in an argument, storing it in a variable, and then doing something else with it, like breaking the problem down into smaller pieces and working your way up. That's the key for you building confidence, is being okay with not knowing and definitely having the skills around problem solving. Now I'm going to go back to this slide here because I did have this slide here to kind of really challenge a few of you all, because a lot of you may not have had the opportunity to interview at companies or talk to companies about this technical challenge that we're having here. Basically building an application from a monolithic repository or way of running in our environment to more of a microservice. Some of you might not even know what I'm talking about when I say microservices, but it's okay. And the reason why I have this slide here is that sometimes it intimidates you. It kind of like throws you off your game, excuse me, and or causes you to kind of like fumble the whole interview process. But if you really just bring it down to a first principle, if you really just look at the solution or the problem and just really bring it down to, all right, I may not know everything that's on here, but I know that that image over there on the left, right here, is a computer connecting to a server storing some type of data, right? And then I know on the right side over here, it looks like an even more larger infrastructure, that there's a mobile device, a computer talking to something called a gateway, and it's talking to multiple services that talk to a database, right? Just breaking the problem down. And listen, I haven't even really told you the prompt for this. I'm just giving you an example of illustration that sometimes when I've had candidates come in my one-on-ones and mock interviews, literally just crumble when they see something that they're not really familiar with. Is be okay with that and continue to work the problem. Because first principle, back to this slide, is going to be your key, breaking it down from big problems to small. Now that slide was just there to kind of give you like an insights into like, hey, this could be an interview question around, hey, how do you take a service from back that slide? How do you take a monolithic service and develop it in a microservice infrastructure? And or really talking about what an API and how APIs can be used for such use case. But we won't dive too much into a question like this. Come to my mock interviews. I have a mock interview where I really dive into this even more, and you'll be interested in the conversation, but definitely want to continue to talk about building confidence. Because another skill set that I know that all of you should be, if you haven't already, be developing is around data structures and algorithms. Now, the reason why I have this as a bullet point for building confidence is because majority of the problems you're going to be solving, especially online assessments and or lead code style questions, which kind of fall into the same bucket, you're going to be using one of the two. And especially when you're going to be showcasing your skill sets in a code pairing exercise, you're going to be using one of the two. Now, data structures, for sure. You're going to, and I'm more or less talking about Python, some type of an array list, maybe a set, tuple, different type of arrays in a list, maybe all the way up to a data structure such as hash maps, dictionaries, and using them in the right use case. And or writing an algorithm that does, a queuing system, push and pull and popping out certain elements, right? But in general, practicing them, developing these skill sets is definitely something that will help your confidence. Because most people really feel like, hey, when they go into an interview, it's just going to all be coding, all about data structures and such like that. But there are some specific things that I want to make sure that you use as a skill set to develop this awareness of the use case for data structure. The first thing that I want to make sure I remind you all, because I'm not sure why they teach this in school, but definitely I found that a lot of you all don't honor this in the sense of reading other people's code. Now, one of the most interesting thing that happened to me in my career is that I transitioned from being just a systems engineer, that's basically managing building computing infrastructure, to becoming a software engineer that basically builds and manages software is that I had to learn how to write code. Now, me learning about data structure and algorithms, I could have took the path of, hey, I'm going to go back to school. I'm going to go buy all these books, and/or read other people's code was the key thing for me to develop that skill set. Because what you don't know, or what you haven't had the experience, and maybe some of you all have, is that you read somebody else's code and you'd be like, wow, I didn't know you could do that. Now, guess what you have? A new index of ways of solving problems or utilizing the programming language that you thought you were really proficient at, right? So I want to encourage you to read other people's code. I have a repository that I'm going to bring up that can give more context around when I'm talking about reading other people's code. And when I go through the resources section at the end, I'll definitely bring it back up again. The other thing is that this skill set, it's a requirement. Mastering this skill is non-negotiable for technical interview. I've had a lot of candidates, cohorts come into my meetings and be like, hey, how it really is important is it to learn how to use data structures and algorithms. And in general, it's foundational to computer science and programming at a very high level. And if you are looking for those type of roles, I for sure guarantee that you will be using these skill sets in the job, but you also have to show these skill sets before you get the job. So I do want to encourage you all to continue to practice. Now, one of the things I want to bring up is a really cool resource. I'll have all these links available at the end of the slide, but there's a GitHub repository. Actually, first step back. If you're not on GitHub, make sure you get your GitHub account. As a technologist, I always go to your GitHub account before I even check out your LinkedIn or your resume, especially if they're on there. You want to go to your GitHub account first. But there's a really cool GitHub account called, or GitHub project called Algorithms. It's an open source resource to learn data structures and algorithm and their implementations in any programming language. And when I go to the site at the end of the slide here, I'll definitely scroll through so you can see the different programming language and also some examples. But the key thing here is that the resources that you need to develop these skill sets, all of them are online. You may not get it all at school. And more specifically, you may not get it fast enough at school that you need to showcase your skill set for a potential job opportunity or internship. Because there's a metaphor that I actually was telling a student before this session here that I'm going to mention to you all, and hopefully it resonates with you. Especially the candidate or the cohort was mentioning that they were going to be interviewing potentially at Google or another FANG type company. And he's a freshman. And he was like, hey, what areas should I be practicing? And I was letting them know that, hey, what these companies are looking for is for you to do more than what you've already learned in school, because you're not going to learn data structures until, next quarter or next semester or even next year. So what these companies, especially at that entry point, being freshman, sophomore year, they're literally looking for, and this is the metaphor, they're looking for a Mark Zuckerberg that got accepted to MIT, that doesn't go to class and codes all day. I don't know if you caught it. They're looking for a Mike Zuckerberg that got accepted to MIT, that does not go to class and codes all day, because that's the skill set that they're looking for, is ability to write code. Now, the only way that Mike Zuckerberg was able to really build a platform called Facebook was to be in coding or being in the environment, developing those skill sets more than what he was learning in school. And that's what that supplemental education and advice that I want to give you is to make sure you use these tools out here, especially if you're really shooting for those companies as the places you want to be employed at and or have your internship, is you're going to have to stretch yourself and learn a little bit more than what you're getting at school. And this is one of those resources that you can lean on. This is how you build confidence. Because can you imagine your first job interview is going to be with one of these FANG companies, and I'll be way more confident if I have this as a resource of things that I've prepared myself for before that conversation, rather than only using what the school has provided to me, which may not meet the bar that they're looking for. So definitely want to encourage you to extend your scope and stretch your knowledge. Now, some interview strategies that I really, really like to emphasize during our conversation, because these strategies that I'm talking about really do come from years of interviewing a lot of candidates, and definitely something that I want you all to take with you as you're developing your skill sets. I have a screen here that I can't find. Oh, there it is. And more or less strategies that I want you to build up proficiency, and definitely help you out. All right. So interview strategies that have been pinnacle, especially when it's coming to the code pairing session. Now, behavioral, there's other career coaches that can give you more insights into it, but I want you to continue to sharpen those skills. But I'm talking about technical interviewing specifically around code pairing. Now, one of the strategies that I like to emphasize, especially before interview, is number one, make sure you reread your resume and remember everything that you put on there. You don't know how many candidates I've interviewed, and I was like, hey, you wrote on your resume that you worked on this project building this. And they were like, what? I don't remember I wrote that. Is make sure you read your resume and more or less, not just read it, but familiarize yourself with talking points about your resume. That project that I was highlighting, right? Before I actually go and interview, I'm mentally, mindset wise, going to replay a story, tell myself, remind myself of that moment, because I might have to dive deeper into the conversation about it and or talk more technically about my implementation. Now, if you haven't talked and or thought about and or reenact any of that, imagine that you have to do that during your interview. So one of my interview strategies is read your resume and more or less follow and not more follow up, more or less walk through those things that you mentioned, project, work experience, and or technical skills that you're highlighting so that you can speak proficiently. Another very important skill set, especially during the coding section, and this is the one that I think CodePath provides a really cool strategy around, which is limiting your coding out the gate when you first get your prompt. Example, you know how many interviews I've had a candidate come in, talk to them about the problem, and before I even finish say, hey, do you have any questions? They're already trying to write code. And most of those candidates do not get through. Some of them do, but most of them do not. The most candidates that got through follow the strategy of documenting the way that they understand the problem, providing some type of pseudocode, and then developing an implementation that we will iterate on. With that said, CodePath provides a well-known interview strategy called Umpire. Now, inside the chat room, raise your hand and let me know if you're familiar, or put a +1 in the chat room if you're familiar with Umpire strategy. So drop a +1 in there. Let me see how many people. All right, all right. I hope all of you are. Now, one thing that is very interesting, and it's probably the funniest thing that happens whenever I do mock interviews, which we'll talk about mock interviews at the end, is I'll do a mock interview with a student here at CodePath. And one of the feedbacks that I will have is that, hey, you need to write down the understanding. Have you ever heard of CodePath's Umpire strategy? Every one of them says yes, +1. But when it's time to do it, I don't know what happens. You get nervous, you forget, it's in the moment. Maybe I didn't say go, but remember, these strategies are strategies that you should use every time. Now, I have my own professional opinion about the Umpire strategy. I think it is a little lengthy in the way that they have it worded, in the way it's structured, but it's extremely effective in showcasing skill sets. Before I even knew about the Umpire strategies, the things that I always used to give candidates credit for is they're documenting their solution or their idea of how they're going to implement the solution. Pseudocode structured in a way that's not like code, but really just articulates what they're trying to do so that, and this is the way that I like to describe pseudocode. Pseudocode is written in a way that you can write it in any language. I can go write it in Python, I can go write it in Java, I can write it in TypeScript, it doesn't matter. But pseudocode is written in a way that I can go write it in any language. And then the last thing is obviously implementation. The Umpire strategy do have some other things like matching, reviewing, and evaluating. I have nothing wrong with them. It's more or less, I more or less follow a different strategy, but the strategy I follow really aligns with what Umpire strategy really foundationally wants to bring out, which is documenting your code before you start to write code. Imagine if you're trying to debug a problem and you're not even really solving the problem for the prompt. Imagine you get to the end of the interview and you just realize, oh man, there was an extra argument that I should have passed in there, or there was a requirement that I did not catch. And it's not until at the end of the interview. That's why it's important to document. And this right here is one of the biggest confidence builders I can recommend, which is following a strategy. Because if you have a habits, I think I wrote this down. Let me see if I get it. I said something like habits habits increase confidence, especially when you're under pressure, something like that. Like it's in the sense of if you have a habit or a strategy that you follow, it's going to increase your confidence, especially when you have that pressure. Because if I have a strategy or a habit that I follow every time they give me a prompt, I jump right into writing how my understanding is, and then I start to write pseudocode and kind of really coming up with a solution. I guarantee you're going to feel that confidence, especially if it's a question you don't answer or don't know the answer to off rip, but at least you have a foundation for you to start off with, which is a strategy. So I definitely want to encourage you to keep that in mind. All right. The next thing we're going to talk about the importance of mock interview. Now, how many of you all in the chat room put in there how many of you actually have attended a mock interview, have actually done a mock interview? Drop that in there, please. So a few of you have done some mock interview, one mock interview. Anyone else? A few more, 3 mock interviews. Good, good, good. Does your friends count? Of course your friends count with mock interviews. Let's get that in there. So how many mock interviews? Yeah, never. There's a few -1. I don't know how you do a -1 mock interview. Is that like you go? I know how you do a -1. You sign up for a mock interview and then you don't go. That's a -1. But in general, mock interviews are going to be one of your most effective ways for you to increase your confidence for interviewing. I don't know how much more I have to scream this from the top of my lungs. Practice mock interviewing. Practice like you're in the real game. When you're practicing with your peers or friends or your other cohorts here at CodePath, practice like you're really interviewing. You got to do an introduction. You got to tell me a little bit about yourself. You got to get prompted for this question. You got to have follow-up questions afterwards. You got to have a closing, right? Practice mock interviewing, because I guarantee you, if you increase your mock interviewing, it's going to be very comparable to you actually taking or going through an interview. Now, the cool thing about actually going through the interview is you get to get that experience talking to a company, that pressure going through the recruiter, meeting the hiring manager and or another engineer on that team. There's nothing that really compares to actually really going through the interview process. But mock interviews are right there beside, because you're practicing that interaction. You're practicing sitting up, getting ready, looking at the camera, talking about yourself, writing code, talking out loud, articulating yourself while you're writing code. Like, you have to practice that. Now, if you don't practice that, I will say that your practice is going to come when you have to go interview at Google or Facebook and Meta or something like that. And that's not when you want it to be the first time in your practice, right? You really want it to be something that will really reflect who you are and the opportunity you have, so that you can be just like this young gentleman here, sitting confidently in front of a potential hiring manager, talking about the things that he's passionate about and or the skill sets that he's developed over the years. And this is the thing about mock interviews. It really gets your mind to feel what it feels like to have that pressure, so that the next time you feel that feeling, it's all right. I've felt that before. I felt the anxiety feeling. I felt like sometime I actually had a cohort come into my mock interview, and when they first went in there, they said, yo, it felt like I was really at Twitter about the interview and I was scared out of my pants. And I was like, yo, that's the feeling I want you to feel. Be okay with it. Now let's just showcase your proficiency, because you know what that feeling is, right? Is to practice that. Now, the next thing that I want to talk about are resources and tools. So there was one resource that I kind of quickly went over to help you build confidence in these interviews. And one of them that I'm going to dive more into are going to be around just ways for you to keep your ears on the streets about technology and things that are going on, and services and or ways of doing things, which is a great resource. I have the algorithms that we're definitely going to dive into, and one more that I'm not even sure if you all are aware of, and I definitely want to have you take a poll. But anyways, so the algorithms repository that's on GitHub, and remember, if you're not on GitHub, please check out GitHub. This is one of my cool resources that I give to you all, because I have a mantra that I want to make sure I always mind. Reading other people's code will make you a better engineer, right? By reading other people's code, you will really develop an understanding of how these things, how things work. But let's say that I'm working in Python and I'm like, man, I've never really seen how to implement a binary search. Or I'm in Java and I've really never seen how to really make a queue really effective for this type of question that may be there, right? And I want to see what the code looks like. So on this page here, and I'll drop this in the room here. I don't know if anybody else has already copied and pasted in there, but I'll drop it in here for everybody to see. But the cool thing is it's written in multiple programming languages. So there's one for Java, one for Python, C, Go, and so on and so forth. Well, let's go check out the Python repository real quick because I'm trying to learn how to do binary search. All right, so let me see if I find any here. It breaks down in different type of topics that you can find. There's dynamic programming, different type of data structures, compression algorithms, graph, right? If that's something that you're looking to develop, math learnings, let's see, search, sort. Oh, here goes searches. So let's see search here, right? Let's see, oh, here goes an implementation of binary search, right? What do I have here? I have expert code base that's managed and developed by engineers around the world. And you can check out the Git logs, check out the, blame, see who actually committed this code and stuff like that. But in general, it has a way for me to not just see, all right, these are the engineers that committed the code, but not only to see how to implement it by just scrolling down. And if you're not familiar with, what's it called? Dot test or what is it called? Test, I can't remember the name off the top of my head. But this code right here, this is inside the comments, but it's actually basically like a unit test. And basically what you're doing is running unit tests on this code base so you can validate if it works. You might not understand what I'm talking about, but when you go through here specifically, if you're a Python developer, you'll understand what I'm talking about. But the actual code itself is a little bit after the documentation above. But the thing is that, hey, I can walk through this code and really just read it, break it down into different sections. Here goes some more sorting algorithms or how sort works. But the key thing here is not only do I have the code base to actually do a binary search, and I'm actually trying to scroll all the way to the bottom so I can see what it looks like from the main entry. But anyways, not only just structuring together and piecing together in terms of that function, but I don't know how you debug code, but the way that I debug code is I put print statements everywhere. So I would check out this repository and I would put a print statement right here so I can figure out what right and left is. I'll put a print statement out here to find out what main point is or midpoint is. I'll put a print statement out for this whole dictionary right here just so I can see what's going on with this function or with these ways of doing a binary search. And what I'm really getting to in terms of this repository is going to help you build confidence if you have examples of how other people's done it that you can read, but also debug. So check out this repository, definitely take a look. And if you have any trouble, put some debug statements in there so you can break down the code to understand what's going on. And then I get you, boom, I guarantee you, you'll catch it. You'll get it, right? By reading other people's code, and then you have a way to implement. All right. So that's one of the first resources that I want to mention today, which is the algorithms GitHub repository. And the cool thing is that it has multiple programming languages. So I know that some of you all were talking about learning Go. That's what you can go learn Go data structure and algorithms right off of this repository here. So check it out. All right. The next resource that I want to talk about, resource and tool, is called a style guide. Now inside of the room here, put a +1 if you've ever heard of this Google style guide. Put a +1 in there. If you haven't, put a -1 inside the room. If you've heard of Google Style Guide, put a +1. If you haven't, put a -1. All right. Looks like we have a few negatives, a few positives, for sure, for sure. And definitely for those that have not heard of a style guide, one of the things that you are going to encounter throughout your journey, let me do a time check. So we got about, good. One of the things you're going to learn throughout your journey is that regardless of where you're working at, you might work at Google, you might work at Facebook, you might work at Amazon. They're all using the same programming language in Python, but each of them doing it does it a little different. Most of us follow a standard style guide of how we're going to structure our program, how we're going to have our includes, how we would do certain functions in that specific programming language, how we would define arguments, how would we do styling in our code base. And a pro tip that I want to recommend to you is that if I go to your GitHub page and I look at a project you're working on and you're following the standards that we define in our style guides, you're getting 2 thumbs up from me. I don't even care what the code is. The way that the program is structured, the includes are right, or the imports are right, The variables are defined in a way, structured way, and or following our standard. So more or less what I really want to get to is for you to have confidence in writing your code and showcasing your proficiency. I would highly recommend you taking a look at the Google Style Guide that we all in the industry uses as a standard. Literally at Google, at Twitter, our style guide page went to this page, which was funny. It was like, yeah, we're not going to go rewrite a style guide. We're just going to use Google Style Guide. So if I would encourage you is to take a look at these style guides and definitely dive in. We're going to quickly just go into the Python one. And if I take a look at the Python one, you'll see there's different things that they're telling you. Make sure that you run linting on code. This is how you declare different functions. This is how you do imports. And I mean how you do packages, pros and cons. There's examples of ways for you to do it, ways that you shouldn't do it. But in general, I want to encourage you to take a look at these style guides and put them into practice, especially when you're writing code, showcasing your proficiency, but also doing your coding exercises. All right. The next resource and the last resource that I want to tell you about is this concept that I like to remind you all is to keep your ears to the streets. When I say that, what I really mean is keep up on what's going on in our industry because it's ever evolving, it's ever learning. You're always going to be learning. And one of the skills that you're going to have to learn is going to be around managing systems and definitely understanding like underlining components or concepts. And one of the best resources I've found so far is a newsletter called Byte Byte Go. The author of the newsletter he actually used to work at Twitter, and he wrote a really good book around system designs. Now, system design in terms of interviewing isn't something that I would expect new grads and or first years interns to really dive into. But I guarantee you, once you become a junior, senior level, and even higher than that, staff level engineer, this is a concept you should be familiar with, and that's why you're getting this resource right now. Now, the thing is just follow along. Subscribe to newsletters like this, and more or less use these newsletters as a resource for you to develop skill sets like understanding databases types. Most important ways of Redis is used. I don't know if y'all know what Redis is, but it's more or less a way for you to have random access memory cache across the network, right? So you're really being able to access things really low latency. Or you have a way to do search. So I was actually doing a search before here, but I have a slide or a post that I always like to bring up, which is GitHub. Like, let's really talk about a use case for GitHub and how we use it in the industry, right? Scroll down the advertising that they have here, a little bit more advertising, but here, an example of how to use GitHub, right? Or how does GitHub work? You didn't get a chance to learn this in school and or an opportunity to really see it in practice. This is how you're going to level up by subscribing to newsletters like this and also following along because this stuff continues to ever evolve. All right. So those are my three big resources and tools that I highly recommend you all to be familiar with. Remember, this is all based off of helping you build confidence for that technical interview and definitely resources that I recommend every cohort here at CodePath whenever I get a chance to chat with you all. All right. So we are at the end of my conversation. I feel like I've been talking for like 40 minutes straight. Looks like the slide has been running for about 40 minutes. And definitely want to encourage you all to ask any questions. I know Nora is still online. Looks like, yep, I can see her. She's there. She will definitely field questions inside the chat room. So if you do want to ask the question in the chat room, just put it in there and she'll queue them up for me. If you're brave enough to come up on stage, which I hope you all are, at least one of you, to come and ask me a question, this is an opportunity for you to ask a question specifically around the topic that we're talking about today. And if not, we'll definitely have some other moments. Looks like somebody opened up the camera. Do you have a question? Yes, no, maybe so. If you have a question, raise your hand. There you go. Now you're at the top. Go ahead and ask your question.
Yeah. So one thing I definitely wanted to ask about is when we're told in these tech interviews, we're told to first look for like a brute force solution, slash anything that can kind of get something to work. But a lot of the times, when you're looking at patterns and when you've seen like similar types of questions before, implementing a brute force can take away from the actual time you have to solve it in the most optimal way possible, which you'd want to do. So I wanted to ask, what was your take on that?
Yeah, for sure. So I got maybe two feedbacks on that. So one thing that I want you to make sure you accomplish, especially in code pairing exercises, is that you get code on the paper. One of the challenges that a lot of candidates have when they're really looking for an optimal solution is that they'll come up with an optimal solution, but not enough code on paper to reflect that optimal solution. And they really feel like, hey, just because I was able to explain it and or provide some type of insights of how I would implement it, that that's sufficient. Actually, it's the opposite. We want to see code. So my recommendation is that you get code on paper. Now, if code on paper is a brute force solution, remember, code is always meant to be iterated on, right? I mean, this is the other thing is if you write something that's brute force and you acknowledge it and say, hey, to the interviewer, hey, this is my first iteration of this code. It's brute force, but I'm going to iterate on it even more. It does require you to keep enough time at the end for you to iterate more, but it's better than not having code on paper. Hopefully that gives you some insights. The key thing here, especially when you're doing coding exercise, is that you use these strategies to build confidence on the solution that you're going to implement. Now, if you're implementing a solution that is going to go left and you're not going to really hit the mark, that's okay, right? Be okay with that. But you're going to learn from the process. Was it because I didn't really understand the problem sufficiently enough? This is the part of reflection. Did I understand the problem? Did I make the right matching in the pattern? Did I follow the code that I wrote or did I follow the pseudocode that I wrote? Did I get enough clarity from the interviewer? Like that's what I want you to spend some time reflecting on when you run into those scenarios so that you can make it better in terms of the next time that you have that attempt. So those would be the two advices that I have for those scenarios, and definitely want to encourage you to continue practicing, be okay with where you're at in your journey. But definitely code is supposed to be iterative. I mean, if I write a print hello world right now, I guarantee it's going to have a syntax error. And then I'll iterate again and be like, oh, okay, I fixed that. All right, next question up. Next question up. Your hand's raised. Jamar, is that?
Yeah, that's my name. Hi.
How you doing?
I'm doing well, thank you. Appreciate your demonstration and advice. Thank you. My question was, I've been on a few technical interviews and I never had or got to the point of a system design question. So my question is, what type of roles typically ask for those? Are those full-time roles, or when does someone need to know those for, an interview?
Yeah, so great question. So as of late, a lot of companies have been throwing a lot of curveballs to new grads, interns, and first years. I've had some cohorts come in here and say, I didn't even know that we were going to ask me a system design question, and they asked me the system design question. And I'm not saying that you need to spend time developing the skill set, because the thing about system design is you're not really going to grasp it until you actually build systems, right? And that's why we don't really ask these questions until you've been in the industry for 3 to 5 years or a few years, at least 3 years, right? You're heading into level 2, going to level 3, we might ask you a system design question. Now, system design really entails not just writing code, but understanding how your code impacts the underlying system that you're developing or supporting. The type of roles will be software engineer roles. We'll be asked system design questions. It will be mostly done at a higher level than intern or new grad. So I would say level 2, level 3, and above is to prepare for that. The main reason why I put this tool or this resource out there for you all is that you have something to look at, because I've had a number of candidates come into my meeting and they're like, I don't even know where to start. At least you have somewhere to start as a resource. It's not going to be the first of the 3 resources that I would recommend you to use, but I would definitely say subscribe to that newsletter so that you can constantly see what's going on in the industry. And then when you get that interview call that says, hey, there is a system design and or talking about tech and or a use case scenario and or a theory about tech, these are all the titles that they've kind of tried to change the word system design, is that you have that as a resource for you to go and reference. So that's why it's more or less there. Hopefully that makes sense.
Yeah, I think it does. Thank you.
Roger that. I didn't see who came up first, so you two that have your hands raised, choose whoever goes first.
Yes, are you referring to me?
I believe so. You opened up your mic. Welcome. Thank you so much.
Okay. Yeah, so it was actually about the object-oriented programming part of it. Do you have any resources for that, or how we should prepare, or for like database questions?
Yeah, so whenever I think of object-oriented programming, Java is definitely one of those programming languages that's foundationally how it was designed is to be designed in an object-oriented lane, right? Python provides that by, providing classes, methods, and things like that. And in general, I believe that algorithm resource here has things about dynamic programming and may even have something around object-oriented programming. I don't see it off the top of my head. So I might have to follow up with you for a specific resource in Python and object-oriented programming. But should you be prepared to talk about object-oriented programming in an interview? I would say yes. It's a concept that if you understand it at the beginning of your journey, it will help you as an engineer when you're developing code. A lot of people, and for instance, a lot of the code you're working on inside of lead code is going to be like functional programming. It only does one thing. Even though they say class is solution, but you're just writing one method, it's functional program that you're writing. You're not really writing object-oriented programming. An object-oriented program, for instance, let's say an object is a house. One of the methods for the house is open door. Another method in the house is turn on the sprinklers in the back, right? It's like going from programming functionally to defining an object and building methods around what that object can do. So I would highly recommend you to at least familiarize yourself with the concept, work on some proficiency in terms of solving problems around like, hey, building up objects. But in general, it's pendulum goes from one side to the other. Like the last person that came up, I didn't even know they were asking system design questions to interns, and they were asking system design questions. I don't know if they're going to ask you object-oriented programming questions, but I will familiarize myself with the concept so that I can speak on it. And if remember, there's two different lanes here. There's people that can speak on a topic, and then there's people that can actually implement it. At least be one of those people that can speak on the topic. If you can't implement it, that's all right, but you at least could be able to speak on it, especially if as you all are just at the beginning of your career. Now, when you've been in the field 3 to 5 years, I expect you not just to be able to speak on the topic, but also being able to implement and or make recommendations in terms of changes to it. So that would be my advice about that. Continue to sharpen those skills. But yeah, you may get asked for it, but it's the pendulum goes far left to right. I don't know what they may ask. So hopefully
yeah, I appreciate it. And then I just had one more is just you had said before, like you should be good at making the introduction for yourself as like a recruiter. What are some good introductions that you've heard that was successful, and what did it cover?
That's a really good one, because I'm going to tell you something that I hope I do not offend anybody when I say this. When you do an introduction and you're talking about yourself, we definitely want to hear about the work you've done, the projects you worked on, and or something cool that you worked on a technical lane or technical perspective. And just to calibrate your mindset so you really understand what I'm talking about. And I don't mean to offend. I do not care about your project when you're doing an introduction. I really don't. I care about the technology that you use to implement your project. Lead with that. So if I'm talking about, hey, I'm working on this service that does this, it got 1,000 users, it has this really great user interface, and we're working on, getting venture capital. Yeah, that sounds like a really cool project, but what technology did you use? Rather than, hey, I actually just finished this application. We rewrote it in React. We were originally using AngularJS. We had some difficulties talking to some backend with Node.js. So we decided to move our database to SQL. We're using SQL, but I'm actually trying to move it to a NoSQL instance because I don't really like structured databases, because when we actually had users connected to this application, it had some challenges and we didn't have. Do you see how I'm talking about the tech versus the project? That's what I want you all to lead with when you're introducing yourself and talking about your journey, is really talk about the tech. Lead with the tech, and then all that other stuff is fluff, right? And then it comes into life. Because the first example I gave you, I don't know how that applies to the role that you're applying for. But the second example that I gave you, guess what? You just mentioned React. We're thinking about using React. You just mentioned MySQL. We use MySQL. That's how you're able to connect with organizations and really reflect on your journey. is lead with the tech. And that would be my recommendation for your introduction. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I appreciate it. Thank you very much.
For sure. All right. It looks like most of our questions have been asked and or answered in the chat room, Nora. Have they all been answered mostly? Thumbs up. Yeah, yeah. All right. So we got one more question that is with your hand raised. That's gonna be our last question for today because I got a 5 o'clock on the dot. Well, I'm on, at least on the East Coast. But go ahead, ask your question.
Hi. I would like to ask you, what advice would you give someone, or what approach would you take on how to search and find remote jobs or online jobs in the tech industry? Because in my case personally, I'm gonna be moving back to Europe pretty soon, and that's something I would like to pursue as my career, but also I would like to pursue a full-time job, but at least not in the next couple of months, definitely, but I would like to pursue an online job if possible. So what approach would you suggest?
Yeah, actually, while you were talking, I was trying to type in the background to see if I can pull up a friend of mine. This is kind of like a non-CodePath resource. So don't feel like it's coming from CodePath, it's coming from me personally, all right? But this resource that I'm going to give you is going to be a search site that you will be able to do a specific search for roles that you're looking for. And I'm going to drop it here in the chat room for you all to take a look. If I can get it to copy link. And my recommendation is that you, number one, apply. If you see a job that says remote and it resonates with the skill sets that you have, apply. Even if it's a job that says you need to have 20 years of experience with 2 PhDs, apply. Because it's a numbers game that you're going to be playing. And now that you are introducing, hey, I need a requirement for it to be remote and I'm actually going to be in Europe, you need to continue to apply. Now, this resource that I just dropped in here is kind of one of those search engines where you can type in keywords, kind of narrow it down, and ultimately find the job opportunities that you're looking for. But sites like this is what I would recommend. It's a site that aggregates all of these job postings together, and then you're able to narrow down your search based on certain criteria in your search criteria. And actually, I kind of see at the top here, if you, I don't know if you had a chance to click the link, there's a button that says filter just for remote. There's a button that says filter just for London, button filter just for specific areas. So this would be one of those tools that I would recommend. The other thing is LinkedIn. If you're not on LinkedIn, let me tell you, LinkedIn is the new hanging ground for people to find opportunities. Not just using LinkedIn to connect to people, but you're using LinkedIn to follow people. So following recruiters, following recruiting organizations, and whenever they make an announcement about opportunities, being one of the first ones to jump on it. Recruiting season for internships just kicked off about a month or two ago. I don't know if you've noticed, but I've been flooded with what's going on at different companies about job opportunities and things like that. When you see it, jump on it. Don't wait, don't pause, don't be like, hey, I'm gonna get prepared for the online assessment. Nah, jump, because it's a numbers game, but you're also competing against other candidates. So these would be some of the resources that I would highly recommend you to spend a lot of time on. The other thing about job searching that a lot of people don't mention to us, and sorry, but I do have a meeting at 5 and we're a little bit over, but I'm gonna drop this last gem, is getting a job is almost like a job in itself. You have to spend the time searching, updating your resume, tailoring your resume, submitting a job, moving on to the next. Creating Excel spreadsheets so that you're keeping track of all the places you apply, so then you can come and follow up and fill in, hey, I'm looking for people that work at this company, and maybe I can send them a direct email to introduce myself, and or finding peers that I know them to see if they can introduce me, right? Is you're going to have to do that extra leg of work. Just applying your resume. A resume is not going to get you a job. It's going to be that extra thing you do. So I want to make sure I encourage you all to do a little bit extra so that you can be recognized, and wish you all luck on your journey. So thank you so much for that question.
Thank you.
At the end of our conversation. And the last thing I want to say is thank you all for hanging out with me for the past 45 minutes. We are a little bit over, so I do apologize. You can find me on LinkedIn. You can find me on Twitter. You can find me on every platform. You can even find me on Google. Just type in Bobby Dorless and you might see some online content around some media, videos, and lectures that I've done before. I really do appreciate everybody's time. I want you to wish you all a great weekend. And as always, thank you from CodePath. We'll chat soon. All right. Thank you so much, Nora. Thank you. I didn't get to check all the replies, but we're all good. Or is there anyone that I need to follow up on?
No, they all answered the questions.
Roger that. Look at these career peers. I mean, y'all are so great. I really appreciate you.
Thank
All right,
you.
everyone. We'll be chatting soon. Take care of yourself, and I will be ending the meeting in 30-second countdown. So you might be the last ones here. I usually have music playing. Like, where's my music at? Like, I feel like I'm lost. Like,
Okay, just a quick, so Akash keeps asking what does number games mean. It just basically means you apply to multiple jobs or internships. Like you don't just get stuck on applying to one internship and be like, oh, I'm just gonna wait until they reply back. No, you want to
yes.
apply to like 50, 25, high numbers.
Yep, for sure.
And that's why you need an internship applicant tracker so that you don't get lost and feel like you're not getting progress because you're gonna get rejected a lot, and that's very, very normal.
Yes, for sure. I get rejected. Can you imagine? They'd be like, nah, Bob, we don't want you. I'm like, me? You don't want? Wow, I guess you don't know who I am then. But it's all right. It happens to everybody. Just be okay. Just no just means not right now. But the next one is lined up and you learn from this one. Keep learning, and you're gonna get better at it. All right, you all. Have a great one. Nora again, thank you so much. We'll be chatting soon. Peace.